It has to be fixed. Obviously, it needs to come from the consumers, but I think more than that, it needs to come from the producers, and the producers will not change if the government will not tell them. And it's not only the local government, it's the global effort.
How can I take nature and bring it to our use, but in a good way? Not to take advantage of nature in its wrong way, but utilizing it in a nice way.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage?
I was fascinated by a TED Talk by Dr. Oded Shozayev from the Hebrew University on how he had managed to grow collagens. In case you haven't heard that talk, you must look it up. It's fascinating. Well, we connected eventually and met in Jerusalem back in about 2018. And he introduced me to a wonderful company called Melodea that was actually incubated at the university. And that was working on some really novel methods to extract nanocellulosis. I ended up spending time with Cee and Shaul, who were both, Shaul was one of the founders and Cee was the CTO back then. And we excitedly discussed various possibilities. Since then, we've continued to engage and explore and work on some very, very interesting possibilities of barriers through using Melodea's materials. And I had engaged with Oded and had him on the show back in early 2022 on episode 4, which is definitely worth listening to. It's a wonderful discussion in case you have not heard it yet. Well, Cee and I were eventually talking a few weeks back, and it surprised me that they had not yet been on the show. And I immediately asked Cee, if she and Shaul could together come and talk to me. And she, of course, being so gracious, straight away said, of course, and which led to this recording. So this is a wonderful exploration with friends on a very similar journey. And I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did. Hello. I'm so happy today to have my friends Cee and Shaul join me for this recording. We've known each other for a while. What is it, like 6 years? I think 2017, I went to Melodea, to your office, and was blown away with what you guys were doing then. And I remain in awe of what you've achieved in this time. So thank you so much, both of you, for being on the show.
We're very happy to be here.
I should say Toda Rabba.
Dhanyavad.
There we go. We can exchange languages. Okay, so I think things I don't know about you. Of course, we know each other on the work side and the things Melodea is doing, and we will dig a lot more into that. But I want to know more of you. Cee, let's start with you. Tell me about growing up and what were things that influenced you that made you take this journey. And then Shaul, we'll switch to you.
I'm guessing the answer is in my name. As you know, that when we met, I had a different name and I changed it to Cee. I'm very close to the Cee. And I think a lot of it is somehow also influenced what I do in my everyday and the reason that we're talking right now. I've grown up, every house that I had was 5 minutes next to the sea. This is what my influence was. It's my quiet time, my noisy time, and my relaxation. And as I grew along, that exploration and being a scientist, somehow everything connected into that. I've actually been in Sri Lanka 6 months back and seeing, things that are very different than what we are used to, let's say in Israel, but knowing that what we do every day will affect how that ocean there looks like and the pollution is something that I'm very grateful to be in a situation that I know that in some way, in my way, I can somehow affect it. So that's how, for me, everything is coming together.
That's amazing. I did not know your name was influenced by the sea. That's a good one for me. So, Shaul, you don't know this, but last time we were talking, Cee had to give me a talking to because I kept calling her by her old name because that's how I knew her. And I thought it's just a short form or something. And she said, okay, only my doctor and you, Ved, are calling me by this name. So you have to stop. So I said, okay.
Also our chairman.
Also your chairman?
Our chairman. He cannot get used to it.
She didn't tell me that.
Also, my best friend is like a brother to me. Is calling me, but he's 5 years old. My niece is that when he's saying the wrong name, he's like, "Dad, she changed her name." I don't remember that, so I love her. Her name is Gali. So, yeah.
No, I learned it the hard way because my wife, who also refuses to use her first name, she actually never liked her first name. And in university, she just started using her last name. So her singular name is MacArthur, which is actually not a first name, right? But she'll just go by anybody she introduces herself to is MacArthur, and that's it. And even when I met her, her visiting card said MacArthur. That's it. So she also similar to you, and I needed to learn to respect that. Because at home, many times we would call her, or her brothers would call her by her first name, obviously. But then she had a different choice, and they've all slowly started evolving, which is interesting. So yeah, it'll come. Everybody will shift slowly. Shaul, over to you. I want to hear more.
I got used to it. I don't make mistakes with that.
Yeah, you've known each other for a while.
Yeah, for a long, long time. 10 years.
Yeah.
Over to you. Tell us. So would love to hear your growing up and influences that led you here.
So I still live where I was born. It's a kibbutz on the foothills of Jerusalem. For me, I'm one of the founders of Melodea, but it was quite coincidental. I did quite a long military service. I was a captain in the Armored Corps. I was commanding a tank company, and then I had the crossroad to decide whether I'm going to continue with the military career or not. I took a 1-year leave and went. The second morning I was in Nepal, and after that in India. And that was my first trip to India, in fact.
Were you at all in Malana?
In Malana, no, but I was in Parvati Valley. I was very close.
Yeah, because the signs there are in Hebrew. There are so many people coming in from Israel, right?
Yes, I was. Of course, I was in Manali. In Manala, I got my wife and I got lost trying to get to Malana. We nearly lost our life there. That's a good story.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because when we started, 98, we first did the Annapurna circuit in Nepal, and then you think that, okay, that's how a trek looks like. Everything is well organized and signed. And then we went to Parvati Valley and we decided we want to do the Malanak trek. The people there told us you have to take a guide, and we said, oh, no, we can handle. We got lost in the forest, and I don't know how we found our way back, and we were very lucky. So that's my Malana story. Never reached Malana.
Once you finish, I'm going to tell more about Malana, but we'll let you continue.
So I went back to the kibbutz and went to study agriculture. My kibbutz has a very strong wine background, grape growing, and one of the best winery in Israel. So I thought that would be my future, and I met Professor Oded Shoseyev, our partner in Melodea. During the studies, he convinced me to join his group to do a master's degree. I was actually on my way to Adelaide University to study winemaking, and I had to stop that. And that master evolved into a PhD in biomaterials, biotechnology, and I was working specifically on biopolymers, nanocellulose, and proteins from insects like spider silks. And at a certain point, Oded has a very entrepreneurship vision. He said, hey, we have something here, we can set up a company on that. And that was the beginning of the story of Melodea.
What made you think about leaving the army?
Family mostly. When I finished company commanding course, I was a lieutenant. I was sent to the armor school where the basic trainees come. And my wife was an officer. My wife now, we got married in 2000, but we were together many years before. She was an officer there. She was about to be discharged, and this is where we met. I still had nearly 2 years of contract when we met, and realized that raising a family and military career doesn't go so well together. And after taking an unpaid leave, when I was in India, actually, I decided to leave. In Manali, I remember writing to my lieutenant colonel that I'm not returning. I did that in Manali, looking at the waterfalls of Vashisht on the other side. This is where it was done.
Wow. So India has numerous influences on you.
India has a huge, huge place in my heart, enormous place in my heart. I can't tell you how much.
That's wonderful. We have to exchange more notes when we meet next time. But it's interesting because obviously Oded was one of our earliest guests on this podcast. When
Yes.
I started, I literally approached him and he was, again, as always, he was so gracious and he was like, yes, of course, I will come on it. But doesn't Oded also have a winemaking history?
He does, competing.
He does, doesn't he? And then, so he attracts winemakers.
That's what actually attracted me to join his group because I knew he comes from the wine background. His PhD is in wine biochemistry. He called me to his office. He asked me, "What is your dream?" I told him my dream is to drive a pickup van in the vineyards with my dog in the back and work in the industry. And he said, "You're going to get bored. And also, it doesn't pay well, this industry. You will have your own winery after you make money. So first do a master's PhD, go to the industry and return to that when you have enough money." So I followed this advice.
And the rest is history. So, of course, for the
Exactly.
listeners, I want to throw a little more light on the Malana and the Manali bit. So Malana is this lost valley, they call it. And it's basically, they say that these are soldiers that the Greeks left behind, and they have continued and they still speak apparently an old form of Greek, and they even look very
Wow.
different from the Indian people, and they have remained secluded. So they used to, I don't know what it is now, but they literally had their own constitution. They didn't consider themselves to be part of India. And
Wow.
they would send some of their kids for education in Manali, and that they would come back then. And that was the way it kept functioning, of course, until people realized it's one of the best places for marijuana. And it became Malana cream. And of course,
Right.
it became world famous. But they are apparently, even now, they don't like people coming into their valley and things like that. So it's a pretty
I now
secluded
remember
place.
that when you say it, yes, that you are not allowed to touch them or to talk to them.
Yeah,
I
you're
now
not allowed to
remember.
touch them. Exactly. So it's a very interesting story. But of course, I want to come back to you, C, because for you, I found lots of very interesting things. And let's start with the surfing, which we were just talking before we started recording. Tell us about your love further of surfing. And again, you mentioned a little bit on your influences, because surfing is, again, a sport that makes you sort of introspect. And does that have an influence on your work as well?
For sure, it's very interesting. I mean, surfing is one of the sports that I have. So most of the sports you think of immediately is something of groups, and I touch a lot of different sports, and none of them are of groups in one way. So it's a very individual sport that I do. I also pole dance, which is a huge acrobatic.
That's tough. That's a tough one.
Yeah, you have competition and such, and but it's the amount of, I call it, Amazons, whoever is either surfing or pole dancing. It's huge sport. Strength, flexibility. You need, and more importantly, you need to have a very strong mind and body for that. And I think it's not, different than being a scientist or a manager, whatever you are, because it's a very individual thing that you need to do. It's yours to manage things. It's yours to be with with your experiments. But in the same time, you need that group. I'm doing it by myself, but when you're surfing, I have my girls with me, which are my sisters. When I'm pole dancing, it's a studio of women together. Each of them are doing their own thing, but we're supporting each other. There is no thing of how you look or if you're thin. It doesn't matter. It's only about fun, and the fact that you're also doing sport it's a plus.
Let's switch gears a little bit. And Shaul, tell us about how did this whole idea of Melodea get born and why did it get born?
Okay, sure. I mean, I was working on these materials, nanocellulose and proteins in my work. But the catalyst was when I was still a student working on the PhD thesis. We joined an EU-funded group. You know, the European Commission has these large research groups. Now it's Horizon Europe. In the past, it was FP7. With the first meeting, we met an amazing Swedish entrepreneur. He was an industrialist from the composite industry. And originally, when we were working on the things that we do in Melodea, it was more oriented to composites, to biocomposites. Unfortunately, I'm speaking of this person in past tense because he passed away in 2019. He was a very, very, very close friend. And he was one of the founders. We were three. So we met in southern Italy. I believe it was December 2009, I believe. And after less than a second, he became a very, very close friend. And he shared Oded's entrepreneurship vision. And after 7 months, we just simply decided to start a company. I mean, Oded said, let's ask Tord if he wants to join. Tord said immediately yes. And this is where it started, very naively. We had the material, we had some thoughts, some ideas. That was the seed that was planted. Obviously, then you have to start building an infrastructure. We registered it in Israel in August 2010. Tord was in charge of looking for money. In those years, the nanocellulose technology was very promising. Everyone was looking to it. All the forestry industry was looking to acquire nanocellulose technology. And he met our first investors and shareholders, Holmen from Sweden. It's a 435 years old forestry company. He met them, one of the tech scouters, in a conference in Stockholm, and that started the process of them getting interested. And it took 2 years for them to do the whole testing and due diligence. And in December 2012, we signed the share purchase agreement, and this was actually where the company was born. I would say January 2013, we started to work. I think Cee started to work on February 2013, something like that. I remember I was new to LinkedIn and I posted a very short line, we're looking for a chemist, and she applied, and things just like that, it happened. So that's where we started.
Wow. Because I was thinking you both went to Hebrew University and there must be a connection there. So that's not where you met then.
No, we did, but I was studying at the Faculty of Agriculture in Rehovot, where you met us. But the Faculty of Agriculture, it's actually a branch of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the main faculties are in Jerusalem. So Cee did her studies in the Department of Chemistry in Jerusalem. We didn't know each other at all before.
And you have Shaul, both of you have such interesting backgrounds in terms of studies because, you did all sorts of biotechnology, Shaul, and Cee, in your case, it's a lot of organic chemistry. And of course, then it's an MBA as well after that. Tell us more about your choice of each of you. Why did you choose these subjects and what, of course, a little bit, Shaul, you said from Oded's influence, but more about what was this calling? Because it's very connected to what you're both doing.
I always somehow wanted to actually do something, I'm guessing, of art, but I wasn't very talented, I would say, neither in playing. Now I know that my calling was dancing, but it took me a lot of time to know that. But I had a very good hearing, as you know, and I can hear very well, and music is a big part of my family and my life, but I wasn't good in playing, I wasn't good in drawing and all that, and I was very good in realistic stuff and thinking, and the most arty thing that you can have is chemistry, is creating from nothing, is just creating material. Of course, the impact that you have on the world once you do that is something that you can never really explain. It's the closest thing to being a creator, close to God in that way. It's also spiritual, that I'm also from a religious house. So all of that comes to doing what you love, but doing something that will have its effect for a long duration to your environment. So I think that started from that. And after being in the academia for almost 10 years, I understood that being a chemist doesn't mean that you know how to run people, you know how to run materials. And it's not the same thing. And it's important to know how to manage people. And I knew that I had it in me, but I did want to get the right tools. So I went to the Tel Aviv University, get my MBA, and I did my entire studies there on technology management. And it gave me all the tools that I needed, but I guess more than the tools is the confidence that I'm on the right track of doing what I want is actually being with people and influencing them to have a right, let's say, much more applied science than science that is right for the academia, which is blessed because we have to have that as well. But I was always the more realistic and pushing towards things that make things in this world.
Well, you clearly haven't changed much, and I would have never thought of chemistry as art. This is a new learning for me, and I see it. I see how you're saying, when you say it, yeah, exactly. It brings things together and it creates something new. Yeah, it's just like while you were speaking, I was like, she's so right. It is like art. So that's amazing. And Shaul, of course, you are much closer to the discipline I have been most influenced with, which is biomimicry. Well, mine is not as scientific, but of course, I always think there is so much to learn on the biotechnology side. And, so how did that choice evolve for you?
As I told you, I come from agricultural background. I live in an agricultural farm, so to say, a kibbutz. And my family comes from a very strong scientific background. So I'm the youngest of four. Both my sisters are PhDs in chemistry and biochemistry, and my brother has a master's in chemistry and science and earth sciences. So I didn't have much choice about selecting to study something related to science. I didn't think of any other alternative, I have to say. But then I connected it to my strong connection to the, mostly it was grape growing and the wine industry, which I still love very much. It's a big part of who I am. It's still the wine is a big part. Whiskey evolved later also, by the way, but wine is my strongest hobby. So I started that. And then when Oded convinced me to do a master's degree, there was no real subject there. I did some plant biotechnology, but I didn't really like it. One day I was just sitting in the library going over a popular magazine, and I saw this amazing article on spider silks. And that really, a light bulb that suddenly turns on, and I realized I want to work on materials, these structural materials that are so amazing in nature. And the idea was to combine it with cellulose. And I told Oded, okay, I will continue to a PhD, but I want to completely change the subject. I want to work on materials. And Oded is very liberal on that. You can do whatever you think in his lab. He's multidisciplinary. There is no theme in his lab. If you will come up with an idea and he likes it, he just tells you to go ahead. And that's how it started. And in the beginning, it was only the proteins engineering, very deep biotech. But then when we wanted to combine it with cellulose, I learned about nanocellulose from papers, from scientific papers, and started to play with the materials, which ended up to be the thing that we commercialized. So everything was quite coincidental, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and that's a lot of pressure with three older brothers like the ones you had, or two PhDs, one master's, all.
There was no real pressure, but it kind of directs you because you talk to them. What should I do? Go study chemistry. So I went to biology. I had to step a little bit to the side. Yeah.
Make your own path a little bit. Yeah, because my father was six brothers and he had the opposite experience because we all carry our own impressions, right? That all his brothers were like yours, MIT and IIT and, all the PhDs. And he literally said, I'm not going to follow my brothers. And he was a very intelligent man who educationally did very little. He just did a bachelor's in commerce kind of degree. And it was interesting because he had the opposite sort of this, I do not want to be compared with my brothers and I'll do my own thing. So it's interesting that we do that. So just taking our conversation further where we digressed back to your education, for you, Cee, why did that LinkedIn post call out to you? Why was Melodea something that you wanted to go to when Shaul put that out?
Good question. No, it's a good, because I always think about that. After the MBA, I had a lot of different opportunities. I think directly in management. I started as the process manager in Melodea, and then moved to being the CTO and now the VP sales and marketing. But I think maybe the fact that it was a material of nature. If you make me think about it right now, I think it's something that I didn't want to do something that was common. Typically, chemists, when they start doing something, it's pharma, it's, something of engineering, biotechnology in the more, let's say, complex sense of it, of medical devices, and those type of things. And here it was something that it had a pure idea, which is still, amazingly, a decade after, still true. When you take something that is the strongest part of nature, and that makes it the strongest material you can use, how can I take nature and bring it to our use, but in a good way? not to take advantage of nature in its wrong way, but utilizing it in a nice way, taking it and carefully extracting what you need without pulling resources that affect nature or harm it in any way, but just utilizing and helping us make things a little bit better, but in a more natural way, less synthetic. And I wanted to bring I think my knowledge from being a synthetic organic actually to that type of area. I think that what pulled me into Melodea.
Whatever Shaul put out, did it give you that information that this was something to do with nature and made that clear, or was that at the time you started conversation?
After the interview, I went and read all the articles about the material. I just
Yeah.
it just seems like I'm cool, but I'm nervous.
No, you're definitely cool. See, yeah, nobody can take that away from you. But let's get into the trenches now.
Yeah.
And of course, this is something that I'm sure everybody listening would be very excited about. Tell us more, because you guys have really stuck to your guns. Like Shaul started speaking about nanochemistry and celluloses, and that's what got you started. And more or less, that's been the focus for you. So, talk to us more about the Melodia technology and also how it evolved from the time you started. Shaul, first you, and then I'm sure Cee will have more to add to that as well.
Sure. So we started focused very much on the CNC, on the cellulose nanocrystals or nanocellulose in general. We didn't have a clear business plan or a clear view of what we want to do. I mean, the product that we were working in the beginning was like, I can make foams out of nanocellulose. So what we were thinking of is to make bio-based foams for composites. And when we were looking for raw materials that are industrially available, we realized that there aren't any. So we had to invent the production technology, also going from the lab to the industry. But I can't say that we had a clear business model. It wasn't like a research, more like, for me, it was like continuing the university research, but with the passing time and burn rate, as startups always have. We realized we need to raise more funds. At the time, our Swedish partner, they did complete the whole investment. It was $4.5 million just to start with, which is amazing. We also received quite a lot of grants from the EU at the time, so we had quite a lot of money just to start with, but we realized we need to go fundraising, and then you have to start to develop a business model. But to cut a long story short, we had to find the good applications for the CNC. In the beginning, it was only CNC. The foams, we realized quite fast that it will take a very long time to get them to the market, and we had to adapt to something different. And we were looking mostly on coatings. And then it ended up that the barrier properties of CNC films are very, very attractive. So we started to work on that as a product. That actually got us to where are we today, where we are selling barrier coating or water-based barrier coatings products. Some don't even have any CNC inside. We kind of completely changed the company from a raw material producer looking to license the technology to a company that is actually producing water-based coatings as bio-based solutions, or I would say sustainable solutions for the packaging industry. It's a shift that we went through our evolution, and we completely changed the company, what we are doing, what we are focused on, and today also we have a very clear business model, and we're able to project revenues and see how the company really grows into an industry. But we had to go through all of these phases in order to be where we are today.
That's interesting for me to hear, because when I got to know you, you were already packaging and barriers. So of course, I don't know the foam history and the materials that came before that.
If you're looking on the top shelves in the lab, you might still find some foam samples that were left from many, many years ago.
Next time I'm there, I'll keep my head up. Except, like Cee told me last time, she's no longer wearing that white coat that I saw her in, in 2017.
You're right. She's now wearing a suit.
Yeah, she's now wearing a suit, which is not the Cee I remember. It'll be so tough, Cee, to see you. The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Paka. Paka has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Paka utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into
amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Paka is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@paka.com, and Paka is Pakka. Now, back to the show. Tell us more about the technology and how, of course, Shaul said that it's evolved and it's come to this. And of course, you've been a big part of that evolution. Tell us how it works and why you think nanocelluloses are the right materials to reuse for barriers.
I think what the involvement was that, and maybe that connects to why I chose Melodea, is that we didn't decide the research. The research just chose us. When we started looking at CNC, it's a material. I mean, it's a nature material. You see, you are just standing from the side looking what this material can do. It can do foams, it can do films, it can be coatings, but you cannot tell it what it does. It tells you what its limitations are. And CNC by itself is a great oxygen barrier. It creates a self-assembled layer that protects from oxygen to pass. But, and it's a very big but, it is very sensitive to humidity. It's a nature material. It likes to be dispersed in water. So this material comes and tells you, I'm great in this, but I need protection. And then you start thinking, okay, but if this material can do this, that means that you have other natural materials that are doing the same thing in nature. I mean, you can look at animals and see how they change their colors and see how they're protected from the worst weathers that you can be, the worst conditions. So we can bring that to a package that it doesn't have such worse conditions in logistics. Sometimes they get hit, sometimes they get a little bit rain, but it doesn't need to have that severe conditions, but you have the same nature material. Let's take those materials and bring them to our day-to-day life. But I think CNC first just showed us the pathway, that it is a potential of taking something from nature and putting it back in where it can be a great influence. So it was just the start of the journey. And then we started looking at other natural materials. We're very proud that a lot of our products are above 50% biorenewable materials, which are amazing, but it's important just the same that we understand where you put those materials, and those materials are not slogan. Yes, we are sustainable materials, but those materials cannot happen if you don't know where to put them, if you don't know what are the right products for them, because the first and foremost, when you come to the packaging industry, we are consumers. We as individuals, we want our cheese, we want our meat to be with great shelf life. I mean, this is not going to change. Hopefully in the future we'll be with a culture that can sustain a little bit if it doesn't hold for 6 months because you're going to eat it in a month. But we're not there. We want everything to be large and big, and we always think we deserve the best, but we need to be a little bit more modest. But until we do, nature can come and help us and do the same thing, just a little bit better. And this is what we learned from CNC, just the smallest particle, above 100 nanometer of a particle that can create now a long strain of film that protects you. It is the smallest thing that brings to this huge advantage, and we just, as good scientists stood and learned from that material. That was all.
So when I actually came to you, the only exposure that I had of CNC was utilizing a very strong mechanical shear force. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, but I remember having this conversation with Shaul initially of, this huge amount of energy that is needed. But that's not the process that you used, and you were still able to create nanomaterials. So how did that happen? Like, I know both of you come with a strong chemistry background, but what nanomaterials were available, at least in 2015 to 17, 18, were created through a big shear force. And how did you decide that you wanted to do this differently and you could do this differently? And then how did you go about doing it differently?
The first nanocellulose that I have ever discovered was CNC. I didn't have any background in the nanocellulose industry. When I was working on these polymeric proteins in my PhD, and we had a material engineer working with us, And she told me that if I want a good interaction between my polymeric protein and the cellulose, I have to go nano. So I simply Googled nanocellulose, and I think the first paper that popped up was cellulose nanocrystals. And for me, that was the end of the search. Only a few years afterwards, I realized that there is a whole family of materials. You have CNF and microfibrillar cellulose. I learned that like a year or 2 years later when I went to the TAPI Nano conference for the first time. And my jaw dropped because I didn't know that there were so many materials. Because for me, it was very targeted search. I found it. I was able to produce it. I was happy. I never bothered to look for anything else because it worked for me. That's the true story. And it was a chemical process, so you don't need to apply high shear force. You simply hydrolyze the cellulose with acid. It was simple, it worked. Go on. That's the true story.
That's much simpler than what I had imagined. I thought there would be a huge curve.
The truth is sometimes simple, Sometimes the truth is simple.
Yeah, and also see, you talked about films, for example. So, of course, if you look in the past, cellulosic films have been around for a long time. You create alpha celluloses and then create films from those. Futamura does it quite well. What is the difference between that process, which is more of a pulping kind of process, versus what Melodea does today?
So I think those materials they're single materials. You're taking a material and you're basing all your needs on only that. What we do with CNC is utilizing it as an additive for other similar products in terms of the chemistry of the bonds, of hydrogen bonds, van der Waals bonds, those type of bonds that creates a very strong network of materials. We are never depending on one material. We have no such formulation. Our materials are simple sometimes in the way that you produce them, but they are very complex in choosing the very right material. It's not even a material that I will tell you, a list of materials. It's a specific grade in each of those because it's a community of materials coming together. And sometimes you need that edge, that leader, that even if it's a very small one, it connects all of them into a place where everything just works. And it works even beyond what you thought it should be, because it's a network. It's literally a network of creating something that's very tight, that can seal. This is what we need. Not a lot of people know that how much chemistry, how much complexity you have in a package. Even us, when we enter this, and you know very well that in my day-to-day job I have to be very knowledgeable in what I do, and to understand that complexity still, I'm doing this for years and it still surprised me how complex something that is simple. I mean, we're taking ice cream, or we're taking our tuna, or we're taking something, we just eat it, but the box is so complex, and it also creates question, does it have to be so complex? So it makes you always think, what is the right way to do. So I think that cellulosic materials that you have today, or in the past, and it's generally a true thing for the material world, sometimes there is too much reliance on one material, and somehow formulations are more for the pharma industry. And it's not true. We need to bring it all together to one place. And I think the reason it's that because you need to have a lot of different know-hows in one place. And this is why a startup can work in this. I had a very big customer, huge chemical companies, asking me, why are you succeeding where we're not? And we're very small, they're very big. I'm saying because in one lab, I have very different scientists coming together. And of course you have those scientists, but you have a science of engineering, and you have a science of this, but I'm making them all talk in 1 second. And this is the difference. To bring all of that know-how into one place, it's also the same complexity that you have in a package, but that's what makes everything works eventually.
There's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas that happens between the people. So let's talk a little more about the process. And, I know it's very complex, as simple as you guys can make it. What is the material that you take? And of course, I understand, Cee, that you said it's an amalgamation of materials. It's different materials coming in. But just for the listener, to make it very simple, that you're taking something, transforming it, and then providing something. What is that process from your perspective?
It's very simple, actually. For a listener, I think it's simpler than when you're speaking to someone with the know-how. You're just cooking. You're cooking something, you're mixing a few different things like salad. So it's less cooking in terms of making a difference. You're making a very good salad, mixing a lot of good things. Some of them will connect, some of them will be there to support. And then eventually you'll have something that you're simply printing. We all have printers in the house. You're putting a page, you're printing. This is why it's simple. We're printing on a different substrate between if it's plastic or paper, but the chemistry of what we do brings it that the printing is very homogenic. It's very connected, and it's most importantly a barrier to whatever you need it to be, depending on your needs. As the complexity is in the materials, but in the processing, that's where it becomes easy. And more importantly, if it wasn't easy, it simply wasn't commercial, because you have machineries, you have what you have. You need to fit to the existing machinery and not the opposite. A lot of startups have that wrong idea that things will change for them. We will change for the industry, and with time the industry will also change for us. They will increase the capacity, they will do maybe changes in the existing machinery to have a higher capacity, but the beginning is very simple. It's a mixing of the right materials, printing them, and now having the right package, and knowing what you're packing and how that will fit compared to what you have today.
That's definitely much more simply put than I would have imagined, but I am going to dig a little bit deeper after I ask Shaul something on the side of how the barrier is actually made. I understand that the barrier is made and then it's, well, relatively simple. But you and I were talking before the call on our scientists playing around with your materials and what they are achieving. So of course, it's more complex than just printing. But that said, I'll park that. Shaul, you mentioned the idea of nature and nature's building blocks, and cellulose being one of them. When I have looked at it from that lens, like yours, I find two major components. One is sugars. It could be basically hydrocarbon kind of chains. And then there is proteins, which is amino acid kind of chains. And there's a very narrow part of the periodic table that does the trick, unlike all the inorganic chemistry that we create further. So do you see, and I'm going to get specific on this, do you see collagens and proteins coming into the mix as well as you guys go along? Because what I see in nature, say, if I look at an Alaska pollock, which is an amazing fish, and it has a very, very low air permeability, and it comes from collagens. So do you see that coming into, and like I was wondering when you were mentioning that more materials are coming in, is that something that you're exploring as well?
It's a very interesting question you're asking. When we started Melodea, before starting Melodea, my PhD is combination of proteins and cellulose. That's the work. So
that's perfect. I think I need to come and spend a week just learning from you as much time as you can give.
So
go ahead. Sorry.
When we started Melodea, we didn't know much, but what we did know, at least cost-wise or industrialization-wise, cellulose is much more, carbohydrates in general, I would say, are much more available, industrially available, and proteins. The materials are amazing, but the cost issue is a major problem. So if we're talking about packaging paradigm, if you want to change that and you're competing with plastics and other materials that are super, super cheap, price always has to be in front of you. We already in the past, for instance, for Oded's lab, there were some nice formulations with nice barrier combining proteins with nanocellulose that has very nice potential, but the price makes it something that you think is even cheap, a protein like zein or even soy protein. When you put it into a formulation and try to calculate the total price of your packaging, you encounter a problem. So I think for the short term, carbohydrates are the solution. For sure, for the longer term, in terms of performance, you're absolutely right, because proteins do provide a lot of performance. You can also make them into plastic-like polymers. Use this the nitrogen and And the peptide bond, it's a very good basis for good chemistry, and it's of course much more versatile compared to the carbohydrates in terms of functional groups. But I think still the cost is a major issue with proteins, at least for commodities. There is application, there are many other applications for proteins, but maybe in the future I do agree that we will need to look for additional sources, and when regulation will be more strict, then proteins will come into the formulations for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned Oded, of course, his TED talk was also on collagens. And when you were talking about
Yes.
it, I just remembered that. The other thing which I wanted to pick your brains on for everybody listening is that in nature you find a lot of physiology that plays a part. So, lotus leaf effect, it's not just the waxy substance, it's the nodular structure.
Correct.
So how do you bring that into your work, if you're creating barriers, because it's protein, cellulosis, chemistry, and then, physiology. And is that something you guys think about and converse about?
For sure. But a lot of it is remembering that it's not our formulation, but rather the connection between our formulation and eventually the substrate. So when we are choosing, we have different grades for if it's going to be in interaction with a plastic, if it's going to be interaction with bioplastic, or if it's going to be with paper. It's different interactions. So, and I think this is the most important thing and strength when you're developing something is remembering that you're not standalone. There is processes before you, and those are the ones we already discussed, and how that material looks like, but also after. What is going to be different substrates. So saying generally it can fit paper or can fit plastic, but not going one by one with all the major paper manufacturers, with plastic manufacturers. It's not accidental, I guess, that a lot of Melodea's investors are those substrate producers because we need to have internally that very important know-how of how that will act. Not to think, yes, I will take the best paper, and then, as Shaul mentioned now about the pricing of proteins, but that paper can cost 3 times more, and it will be not relevant. So you always need to connect between your desire to be a great scientist and have the best performance to reality. What you want is someone to actually use it. So it needs to be also cost effective and think of all those components at once. So it's always the connection of not always the best paper, sometimes a commodity paper, and how we are changing our formulation to fit that. So I think this is how we will look at everything and seeing that physiological in the final package and not necessarily in our formulation, because the functionality of our coatings are when they're dried, not when they're in the wet form.
Yes, when you mentioned the lotus effect, obviously you mentioned the nanostructure of a surface, which forms these super hydrophobic surfaces. So, as I just want to follow up on what Cee said, when we're producing a coating, we're very much influenced from the surface of the substrate, and I would say the performance of the coating is heavily influenced from the roughness of the surface and how even the physical layer. It's not only a chemical barrier; it is a physical barrier too. And obviously, we didn't measure the nano distances between the particles and correlate that to the quality of the barrier. But I'm sure that if we did, you can see a clear correlation. I can say also that with the nanocellulose itself, there's a lot of applications that are waiting, I would say, currently on the shelf to someone to pick them up, directly related to nanostructures. We are supporting a research group in Oded's lab when they're producing this type of nano devices like nano antennas and supercapacitors, and conducting inks that are very much based on this arrangement of nanostructures. But I would say it's still more far away from commercialization. Also, the CNC itself has some very interesting properties that if you take the pure CNC and you dry it in a certain way, you are forming these colorful films very similar to butterflies and to beetles, which is created due to the nanostructure and nano arrangement of the particles in nematic phases and creating these physical colors. also like we see on peacock feathers. So there is a relation, and I'm sure that we will, but these things obviously are, I would say, more, I would say, in a pipeline and a more further applications. We will get there, but I'm certain that even nowadays with our coating, the surface is super, super important.
So I'm going to loop back now to what you made very simple to make it a little more difficult for us. How do you create the barriers themselves? What is your process? So what is it that you're taking in? And of course, I understand there may be a multitude of things, but let's concentrate on cellulosis. So to extract cellulose, what do you take? And I know we've worked together on numerous trials of different celluloses, but today, what is your primary raw material? And then, of course, I presume chemically you are kind of modifying it, and then eventually you are creating a barrier which is, I presume, in a slurry form. So what is that methodology of creating that barrier?
So first, I think we were, as everything that we do, we go from the end to the beginning. When you have different processes to create something, you need to think, if I'll do this process, will that harm me in any way? So a lot of the processes that you have to date for extraction of natural material, but specifically also cellulose, can be with chloride materials. And if you will do that and you use, for example, a hydrochloric acid or anything like that, then you will be in a situation where you still have chloride residues, and then you cannot be in the food industry as those residues will stay there. So when our main desire was in the beginning is to make it simple, make the simplest process that we have, and we're using the sulfuric acid process of extracting the material. Now, ironically, the process by itself is very simple, and it's very known from in the literature from in the late 70s, but
even before. The first paper is from 1949.
Wow.
So, but the complex thing is that you're working, and this is how we produce. You're producing in a harsh chemistry environment, but in the end, it's it's a nanomaterial by its concept, but which is also, by the way, an interesting thing. We're calling it a nanomaterial because nanos are from the size of a 100 nanometer and less, but the material is not nano by the science of it. Science of nanomaterials, the definition is not only size, but the fact that once you reach to that size and below, it behaves different as if it will be above. And it's not true for CNC. It's actually just a size that then creates a matrix. So it's a very different thing. And it's also you need to learn, but connecting that to the production, so you have a very simple chemistry production that needs to create something that is very pure, very clean, with no other materials, so it can interact with itself and with other materials. So it's a sulfuric acid hydrolysis. You're taking the cellulose, which is alpha cellulose. You can start with waste streams. This is how we started in the company, from waste streams of pulp mills. In the idea, in the IP, that is a great thing, but in the reality, it's much more complex, as you know much better than me, because those waste streams hold a lot of different problematic materials, and you cannot have those as residues as you go along in the value chain. So you can do that, and we have that technology for that, but we can also start from a commercial pulp, and this is what we start from. The cleanest that you can have, it can be either a dissolving pulp, and then you'll have higher percentage of alpha cellulose, or from chemical pulp, between if it's soft or hardwood. You could get a little bit different properties of the CNC, a little different rheology due to those properties of the pulp itself. But eventually you get a slurry, a white slurry that is in the micro size. It looks like a milky suspension, very fluid, doesn't look something special, a little bit milky in its way. And and not surprisingly enough, also the way that you make that milky suspension into the final gel transparent nanoside material is to use a high pressure homogenizer that you're using for milk, and you're actually opening those connection that you have into a matrix where the C and C, the particles, are less seeing themselves, more seeing the water inside, and then creating that transparent magical material that now you can use between, if you're using it by itself or as an additive or as between it a 2-dimension, 3-dimension, whatever you would want to use it, but use it wisely.
That's brilliant. That's definitely much clearer for me, and I'm sure it'll be for others as well. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure beyond that, there's a lot more thought and chemistry and materials that go in. And that takes us well to applications. And see, you are somebody I've always loved talking to when it comes to applications and how you think about it. So, of course, as far as I know, there are three broad set of materials that you have: Melox, VB Coat, VB Seal. And I think there's a newer version of Melox that I think you
Yeah.
were talking about last time. And so, what are these materials? How are they applied? And what is the focus for these materials? And of course, for Melodea as a whole.
So, yes, we have a portfolio of products, but when we come to a customer, between if it's a converter or end user, it's irrelevant to them, from my perspective. For them, they need to tell us, what do they want? What do they want? I'll tell them to use this or this, it doesn't matter. But what they need is to say, I have today metallized PET. I want to be only with monoplastic. I'm today with a plastic, but I want to be in paper. So they're telling me, this is my goals, this is my sustainability goals, this is my not even sustainability goals. Sometimes it's performance goal. So I have a cheese package with EVOH based with complex plastics in it. The performance is not good enough because the pricing of EVOH is rising. I have a decrease in the availability of the material. So I'm putting less EVOH than I put in the past. The performance is not good. I need something better. And I didn't even say the word sustainability. And then I will tell him, okay, we have a solution that, by the way, it's also sustainable. But first and foremost, it has the highest performance, even as some customers already showed us, even 10 times better than EVOH. It has better pricing, and it is also sustainable. And this is the new Melox engine that we now issued. It's new just in terms of, let's say, marketing ways, but it's already been tested for 2 years now with several customers already. Everything is in the industrial scale. We were also waiting to have the final approvals for food contact, which we have, the BFR and FDA. So now it's the boom of how that looks like. So when a customer comes, we will tell him, let me know what you want. And a lot of the time I'm telling them, and I think this is why, and maybe you as well appreciate me more than anyone else, is that I'm also telling them, you cannot have it. I'm not gonna, although I'm the VP sales and marketing, my DNA will be as a chemist. I will always say what is possible and what's not. For example, molded pulp is something that is very interesting, and it's a huge hype a lot of the times by PR that you see of Carlsberg and all those companies. But the reality, tomorrow morning, can you have a molded pulp package with all the desired? Yes, in terms of the chemistry. Yes, in terms of the availability of things. But no, in terms of how many converters you have that know how to do it. And I will say it. I will not hide it. I'm not gonna start navigating them into a world where they're gonna do R&D projects and end up with nothing. I'll guide them into, tomorrow morning you can have this. In a year time you'll have something else, and in 5 year time you'll have something better than. But you need to know where in that reality is. And I have a lot of customers who say, great, but then I'll start now, but I want to be only in the products of 5 year time, and everything is open, and it's okay as long as we know where we are. So we have our Melox, which is the oxygen barrier, and it's a substitute for EVOH and the metallized Alox, Silox type of material. We have our VB coat and VB seal. They are both cousins. They both are water vapor barriers. They have a aroma barrier, the grease, oil and grease, and the VB seal compared to the VB coat has also heat sealability. But more importantly, all of those materials can be coated in the typical printing, and this is why I use the methodology of you simply print, because this is what you do. You print those material, one shot, one coating on a substrate, and you get the performance as if you would use a produced plastic. So the production is very different. It's a different way of looking at the product, but eventually you get a product with the same performance, same look, same needs that you have, the same shelf life. We're not touching shelf life. And it's just a matter of having the right bridge between end user that has a certain need, a converter that knows how to utilize our material and a substrate, and eventually a formulation that can bring the performance. Because if and anything, I see from customers a lot of frustration of solutions in the market that do not perform.
Absolutely. Shaul, did you have to add anything? Or I have a different question?
I think Cee was very comprehensive. We can, you can see that we are very much focused on the products now, on the Melox and VB coat. That's what we put in the front now, more than the raw material stuff of CNC. And I just wanted to say that that's part of the evolution of the company, how you convert from a research organization to a commercial organization, and we realized that, and that's the shift that we made, and it's very, very important for us. And I think this is also the foundation of our continuous success.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen the transition myself as you guys have grown and expanded. And it's, again, for me personally, it's so beautiful to see. And when you see that change, a bunch of passionate people like yourselves slowly evolving and getting commercial success. So that's the real key in the end. And what I'm really fascinated by, and this is something, Shaul, that I wanted to pick your brains on how this thinking happened, because one of the things that I was struck by in my journey early on was this challenge of flexible packaging. People would talk a lot about carry bags, and they would ban carry bags. And you would go to a supermarket, they would say, we can't give you carry bags, or you have to pay this much, 10 cents or whatever, for a carry bag. And when you looked inside the carry bag, all you had was potato chip bags and biscuit packaging. And then when I look at, and of course, I come from a place where it's more in your face. It's just there, that nobody is brushing it away in the morning. And especially where I live, we were discussing before, it's a little village in the outskirts. And when I cross the villages, there is no garbage removal system. So it's all going into the canals and things like that. And when I look into that, these are things that are not going to go away for 100,000 years. They're so well engineered. So was there, because you have clearly identified that as your focus, the barriers, and that is the biggest challenge today, especially water vapor, and Cee and us have had so many conversations on that. Was that something that actually motivated you as well in terms of the challenge and the market possibility? And how did that come along in terms of focusing on barrier-coated or flexible packaging materials?
Yeah, you can. I mean, at the end of the process, it is the situation. I mean, as I told you, it was only when we were looking into coatings and realized that CNC is a very good barrier. We started to develop that, and we realized you cannot sell a product at 2 or 3% solids. Then you have to formulate it into something more industrial to reduce viscosity, so on and so forth. So we were very much focused on oxygen barriers in the beginning. But we did identify, yes, exactly what you see, this flexible packaging issue was in our mind very, very clearly. I could say that in the beginning we thought only on paper, okay, not on plastics, as these are more recent opportunities that we discovered now in the recent couple of years. But in the beginning, the idea was, yes, we need to completely change, and I think it's quite similar to what you expressed in your YouTube video when we recontacted, that you need to completely change the paradigm of packaging. As you mentioned, you see these flexible packaging stuff being dragged in the water systems into the rivers, into the sea. So we were thinking only on paper, and while starting to work on these papers and starting to develop at least a packaging concept, as a demonstrator, we realized we didn't find a suitable moisture barrier. Nothing was really actually performing, and that's why we had to renovate and develop the VB coat, because we couldn't find something that the performance is comparable with the industrial demands. So then it evolved into this second product, and then these two together, now we had like a more, I would say now, a toolbox of barriers that can meet the customer's demand and say, okay, it's not only paper. People need that on different plastics. We have opportunities. With VB coat on paper, we can take away the 12 micron PE coating, for all the takeaway food service items, and it will be recyclable. And Cee already mentioned the EVOH issue. We can replace that with Melox, with something that can give you the same performance and be recyclable. It's fully recyclable. So, as you said, you will not take away the plastic products that are so well engineered for thousands of years. They give very good protection, but we can at least improve them and at least give the possibility to recycle and reuse them. So I think that's a big part of the process that we have gone through.
Yeah, and I think it's such a boon that you guys are focusing on that, because that's really what is needed. And see, coming back to you, and we absolutely love your practicality each time we speak to you. And like you said before, it's hard hitting.
Yeah.
And you don't know this, but we channelize you in our discussions internally. Okay, what would Cee say? so and it comes from this idea that you keep bringing up, and this is something I want to share with the listeners.
There are pills for that,
There are? Okay, good. Send us some. So this is something I want to bring to the listeners, because there will be many consumers also that might listen to this show. And, one of the things that you always say, start with where you are. Don't look at, okay, that you're going to try and solve all the problems all at once. And the last conversation we were having was on chocolate packaging. And you say, why do you want to do chocolate packaging? Why don't you start with granola packaging instead, which can be done without metallization? So talk to us a little more about that approach that, start with where you are. And then, of course, we can keep building. So that whole thought process that you have.
Everything starts from the end user. And end user, and that's also a problem when I'm saying end user, because I always forget that the end user is us, consumers, and not the brand owners. But the brand owners are the voice of the consumers. So they will come to us and say, I want to replace, as you said, it can be chocolate, or it can be pet food, it can be any food that they think of. It can be pharma, cosmetics, agriculture. We work with everyone. And that will be the first thing. Second, they will give me a list of performance of barrier. This is what needs to be. And now let me know what type of grade I need to use. The first thing I will do 99% of the time is smile, because then I know that they're wrong and they don't know, and this is the problem. And I have to say that I always super surprised of how gracious the customers are of saying, okay, teach me. And it's not a given thing. It's really not bad. I'm always surprised about that, because I'm telling them, because I'm not a saleswoman. I cannot tell the customer is wrong. I always tell Shaul, but this is what I'm telling them. You're wrong.
Scary in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can actually imagine. I agree with you, Shaul. but then she makes sense. That's the challenge.
The problem. I'm right, and I'm telling them, it's very simple. I'm telling them, you told me you want to replace an EVOH. I'll take an example from yesterday. It was even yesterday. An example of a cup with something with EVOH, with the lid EVOH. Typical everything that we have in the refrigerator. And then they send me a barrier properties of WVTR, water vapor transmission rate, less than 1, OTR less than half, and that is aluminum, guys. And you don't have aluminum in your hand. So it means that there is, and then she said, okay, I'm opening, and she showed me the technical data sheet from her supplier that shows those properties, but it's not correct. So now you need to bridge that. So how do we do that? As we established our own services, pilot and lab services, to show them. And I tell them, send me your samples. This is what you use. We're not going to touch what you're using. Your customer need to have this shelf life. Bring me what you're using. I'll do the test. You will see that it's not the barrier that you have in that technical data sheet. And this, and only this, will be our starting point. We don't need to be, for sure, not better than what you have. So we first need to understand what you have. And then, and this is the second hard part, is to also understand that if this is what you have, it doesn't mean this is what you need. You have in Israel, bottle wraps are from aluminum foil. You can have it in paper. I'm not saying something that you have plastic. You can have it in paper. In the US, most of them are paper-based with the classic 12 micron PE. Some of them already with Vaxxas, but not a lot. But they're not with aluminum. So if someone in Israel, I don't have a lot of Israeli customers, but if an end user of a food company of a butter would come and tell me, okay, I need to change that, then they will give me a technical data sheet of aluminum because this is what they know. And they're right, this is what they know, but you don't need it. So a lot of what we did, and this is how know-how developed, is to take things from the supermarket and test them and understand that what we've been fed this entire year is that this is the properties, this is not what happens in reality. And still our food stuff are great, but it's not the reality. What comes out of the liner of a film is not what ends up in the supermarket. It's different properties, and only those you need to reach, nothing more than that. So it's always working together back and forth on taking a sample. Just take a pouch paper sample and do the test yourself, the shelf life test, and understand if it holds or not. So this is the way that we need to think together with those companies, together with their converters. It's always, this is the challenge. This is it, the bridge of a end user that comes with the needs, that comes with the goals, converters that are not necessarily the right converters. If now we are producing with a extrusion of plastic with a complex structure and the customer wants to go to paper, they don't have the right converter. So we need to bring them the right converter. The fact that we have the solution, the fact that we have not something that is a vision, it's the reality tomorrow morning, doesn't mean that they know how to do it. Although we're the small, they're super large companies, tier 1 companies, but still, because they're so big, it's hard for them to see where it all comes down to, where it's something that you need to do piloting, testing, and this is what we're here for, to give them that know-how of how to do the tests.
So I'm going to curve towards closure. So talk to me a little more, and it'll be good to hear from each of you, both these towards the end kind of questions, on how do you guys see growth and scaling for Melodea in the next 5 years or so? How are you seeing that happen? Maybe Cee, we start with you, and then of course Shaul will have a...
I don't know. I mean, there's the version that I always need to reduce to what I actually think.
Nah. Come on.
I'm pushing her always to be conservative. You know, when we present to the board, be more conservative. Be more conservative.
Oh yeah, board might hear this conversation, so yeah, you have to be careful about that.
You know, I'm doing extreme sports. Careful is not part of the DNA. I think it's what you said. I think we all need to pass. I mean, if you know, in startups, the valley of death in terms of funding, we're in the valley of death in terms of believing. We start seeing the believing, everyone, even in the questions that we get from customers. If I look at questions 2 years back to the questions now are accurate. Now, it's not a simple thing. It means that someone did a lot of work, a lot of understanding to ask me that accurate question, and not, is it compostable? Is it in a home compostable industry? what do you care about compostability? You don't have it. It's just a buzzword. It's not going to help anyone. So it's not buzzwords anymore. It's actual a question. Is the structure PE based or EVOH replacement? It's very accurate. So there is the belief, there is the starting of the know-how, but there is still a lack of belief of the speed it's going to go. And lack of belief comes, typically from facts that are not in our control. A lot of them comes from how is the regulation going to kick in. You have regulation now in India, you have it in the UK, you have it in Australia, and also accordingly the PRs that you'll see of the tier 1 companies are in those countries and not continents, and that's not accidental. But you see the preparation of everyone, and I don't think it's a matter of prediction of if it's going to happen, but rather, are we going to do it? Because it's going to happen if we're going to do it. It's not going to just happen. A very large percentage of the change can simply come from decision, not even funding, not even doing something, put more money because you want to have paper-based. No, same money, commercially available, the existing machinery, just do the step towards that. That's all we need right now. And I believe most companies are willing to do it. I would say tier 2, tier 3 are there. I think consumers are there. You will see in Instagram a lot of images that, you can have ocean images of surface and that, but in the same time, in the same pages, you will see what happens to the sea turtles. So it's not, and we know how to live with that. In the past, sometimes those type of pictures, I don't want to see it. It's there. We're going to see it. We did it. We own it. We need to handle it. And once we own that, I think we'll be in the right step. How fast that is, it's a question of every day that we ask ourselves. But in any way, the way that we are preparing in Melodea is to make sure that we will produce locally, as the business case, of course, justify. But this is why we made the production of our formulations relatively simple. The commissioning step is quite simple. We can, depends on the region, we can use toll manufacturers and have very quickly a local production. As you know very well, the economy will actually be if it will be connected to either the converters or a paper manufacturers, which will utilize immediately the coatings in their process and makes it all very cost effective. So the more you'll go down the value chain, the better it will be for the end users, and the adoption will be quicker. So I believe the beginning will be converters that are taking the material, using it, but the next steps will be substrate producers that are already adopting it in earlier stage.
Amazing. And Shaul, I'll get more specific with you. Ideally, what is the quantum of material that you see Melodea specifically influencing, maybe in 5 years, 10 years, whatever?
I cannot imagine.
Whatever timeline.
It's so hard to imagine. I think it's going to be so huge, okay? Because we are radically changing the packaging industry. We're now doing a small round of financing, but I think the next phase, because the demand will be so big, we will need so much capital to build capacity. We'll have to go public, or be bought by a huge, other organization that would like to change the way they are doing from oil and gas or polyolefins into more sustainable products. I think that's the technology is there. I think as a team here, we set all the infrastructure that includes production, regulation. We have a full and the knowledge that we accumulated in packaging world. We have a full package now. It's going to the market when the market is starting to really need that. And I think we're simply going to be very, very big. That's what I see. I don't see any other way. Because you have to be very big to supply all the demand in the world, and we're going to be present in any continent, I'm sure, either by our name or by partnerships, and there's no other way.
And of course, that takes me nicely to my last question, which is always, always fascinating for us to hear. And to each of you, and I'm hoping that it'll be different thought processes. What does good garbage mean to you?
When I thought about that question, I thought of the fact it was actually hard for me to hear my own answers because in I think every morning when I make the coffee, and then you know how you still waking up and where you're in the coffee and you're in the kitchen, and then I have the garbage next to it, all the packages that I separated. Most of them in Israel, we have a lot of takeaways, a lot, especially in startups and such. And I always look at that, and the volume is, it doesn't matter how long I'm in this, the volume is something that suffocates me. I'm not exaggerating, it suffocates me. And I'm saying, okay, after after you have that feeling, now what do you actually feel when you look at that? And I'm saying, okay, I had this, I ordered salad and they brought tuna, a cheese, and a egg, all separately in separate plastic cases. Did they had to be in that cases? The answer is each of them needs a barrier. That's true. But they're packing it for exactly half an hour. Let's say not in Israel, you need it for 2 hours. Every paper with some barrier will hold that. So you didn't need the plastic there at all. So if it was paper based and you would put it in the regular garbage, then eventually it would even be compost, and it just disappear. It's a biodegradable material. So, but even if you're not going to all of that and you're looking at the packages, I believe 50% of them are in the wrong package, for at least, if not more. I just want to be conservative, so I'm saying 50. The truth is probably much more. You don't need so much. And if you would decrease all of that, even without any innovation, you would find yourself in different volumes of what we are getting. I wish I would say that as consumers, we know how to decrease that. We know all those initiations of having a bottle that you bring from house and fill it in the supermarket. We don't do that. We are not there. But we are in the place that's saying a good garbage for me is it must be a garbage. Is this a garbage? Is what this had to be a must? In some cases it is. Some case there is things that you still have to have aluminum in, but those things are typically medications that you need to have for a long shelf life. The value chain is very long of supply, very complex. It can harm the product. But if today we are going to the supermarket and the fish and the meat are still a shelf life of 1 year, can we as consumers say, if it was half a year, can we handle it? I'm guessing the answer would be yes. The amount of package there would be less than half. But more importantly, yes, we're reducing the shelf life of a few months, but what we're increasing is our own shelf life in this earth, of instead of being only maybe 100 years more, of having 1,000 more. And this is what we all need as consumers to think about when we're looking at our garbage. Good or bad is not the shelf life of a product, it's our own shelf life. How long are we going to stand here?
Thank you, Shaul.
So I would say that I would, in a sense, would like to completely eradicate the word garbage from the terminology. And I think, because I was thinking of that question, and I think if we go back, 80 years or 100 years ago, the only garbage that we would produce would be organic. And non-organic garbage that stays forever. So I think the whole system is broken. It has to be fixed. Obviously, it needs to come from the consumers, but I think more than that, it needs to come from the producers, and the producers will not change if the government will not tell them. And it's not only the local government, it's the global effort. And to me, I would like to live in a world where everything that we use can be either used or compostable, in a very simple sense. and I think we have to be there, and we are working to be part of that. That's our mission.
Toda Rabba, Cee and Shaul, it's always a joy to talk to you.
Thank you,
and
it was a
meet
pleasure.
you. And it's literally got me excited. I have to go back and see you guys and
You're so
spend
welcome.
more time
We'll
in
be very
Israel.
happy.
And hopefully, thank you so much. It'll hopefully happen soon. I'm very excited to continue to work with you guys to build better products. You guys are doing such magical
Thank you so
things
much.
because this is what is really needed by this world. And keep at it. And I just pray for more and more strength for you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We would like also to visit you in your beautiful farm. It sounds like a beautiful place to come.
It's been 20 years, Shaul. You better come
have
fast.
to.
India is changing really fast.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.